president of an Internet Society Rural Development Special Interest Group. So this section is completely on the fake news and the misinformation. So in regular basis, we are looking into the lot of an fake news and the misinformation that is floating a lot due to this coronavirus, COVID-19. So we have very great four speakers, and each speakers are going to address and bringing a lot of information to us about this fake news and the misinformation. So as a first speaker, we have Glenn McKnight from Canada. So Glenn is one of the board member of an Internet Society and the founder of Internet Society Canada chapter. And he also held position from the last 3 years as a treasurer, secretary, and the board member. And in 2017, Glenn was elected as the Internet Society Board of Trustees by the chapter for 3 years for the duration from 2017 to 2020. So, without wasting our time, so we'll start with the Glenn. Glenn, so you can start the section by unmuting yourself. Over to you.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'm assuming my sound is okay. Can everyone hear me? Want to make
Yeah,
that.
sound.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's great to see you all or hear you all virtually. I may have met some of you at the various different uh, Indian School of Internet Governance, and hope to see some of you in Mumbai in the fall. I'm assuming we're still going to do our School of Internet Governance there. Yeah, there's a number of things I want to start off with. You notice the picture of the poster. It's and the image of myself on video. So that's the first bit of misinformation or fake news we have to start off with. I'm a little older than what the picture is, but it is flattering. So that's the first bit of misinformation. So let me go to the first slide. Okay, so this is a famous American writer, Mark Twain. He said, "Never let the truth get in the way of a good story." So what we have is bending of information to for the will, and again, we're talking various different stakeholders who are trying to manipulate information for the benefit of some kind of an agenda. So moving on. Okay, so what we're seeing right now, if you are a student of history, that we're seeing a lot of history repeating itself. Right at the terminus of the First World War, the Great War in 1918, we had a pandemic, and there was a lot of misinformation being spread around for a variety of different reasons. Again, stakeholders having an agenda. So at the beginning, there was a real lack of disclosure on the origin of the virus. And so much so that they named the virus the Spanish flu. Now, it's kind of convenient for them because the Spanish were not in the First World War. They were neutral. And they gave it the Spanish flu, but it was not the Spanish flu. The entire pandemic had its origins in Kentucky, where U.S. soldiers were actually trying to dispose of diseased pigs or swine, and they got a terrible pneumonia, and a number of them got quite sick. But this entire regiment, they went overseas. So the origin of the actual virus in 1918 that swept around the world, killing 25 million people, had its origins in the U.S. So technically, it should have been called the American flu. As a Canadian, I would take exception to that, but this is sort of the example of how misinformation can be manipulated, and we're repeating ourselves with again, because what we saw in President Trump, he was referring to it as a flu. He was referring to it as the Chinese virus. There was a lot of misnaming and misinformation, but entirely on purpose. It wasn't a coincidence that he was doing that. So what happened in the pandemic, there was a lot of information that was promoted by locals to carry on life as normal. And there's an interesting study of comparing cities in the US where they had individuals that were practicing social distance and those that did not. And so you had roughly 900,000 Americans that died. But more importantly, in terms of the pandemic, there was 1 million Indian soldiers that fought in the First World War, and they went back home. And it's interesting comparing the stats now in India, which is relatively small in comparison, but there was 11 million deaths of the pandemic as a result. Again, those people going back after serving their time, which they were ignored by the British, and they went back. They did it as a patriotic duty, and it didn't work out very well for them. So, but 11 million people died as a result in India. What is interesting is President Wilson, who was, a big advocate for the Versailles treaties, hell or high water, they were going to do celebration parades. Even though the limited knowledge, they didn't really know what a virus was, but they said, do not do parades. They did a parade in Philadelphia fairly shortly after the soldiers came back and again, it's natural to celebrate when your relatives come back, but that ended up being very tragic, the number of deaths that happened in the parades. So what we're having is the same sort of tone that's going on in misinformation, telling people we'll be wrapping this up in April. We can't afford having people staying at home and not shopping or going to work and other things. So we want to see our football. So there's a number of things that misinformation is going out without really relying on the scientific facts. So next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the stakeholders who are trying to promote misinformation or fake news. So we have the political battlefield, especially in the States, but it's not only in the States. We see strongman opportunities here in India. We see it in Philippines. We see it in Hungary. And one of the most notorious people is the gentleman from Brazil. Again, manipulating a situation for personal gain. And so, what we had is an interesting, if you look at the progress of this disease, when it was known in terms of being a serious issue in Wuhan back in late December, Americans definitely had pre knowledge of this dilemma. And instead of being proactive, what we saw in the United States one of the first things that President Trump did, he disbanded a fantastic program being proactive, which not only fought terrorism, but it also looked upon the potential of pandemics. And so the first way to deal with something that you don't like because you're an incompetent, you say it's a hoax. And this went into the far right media, stating that this is just a joke and it's a democratic ploy. Again, it's another extension of this ploy of saying the Democrats were actually using this to discredit President Trump. And in terms like statistics went out saying the number of people that died on an annual basis from the common flu was substantially more than what is happening with this. And again, manipulation of stats, contrary to the gentleman that's behind Trump in this picture. Every time he opened his mouth, he said lies. So we're talking a person that was manipulating the situation again, and it's a little bit understandable if you're a person that cannot see or touch something. It's invisible, and it's understandable why certain individuals saw it as something that wasn't that harmful. But what's interesting is the mainstream, say CNN or MSN or CBS, the PBS in North America, they were taking the position that this is something serious to take care of. The far right, the Fox News, the variety of different types of far right media was picking up this message, and the Republican, some of the now have come around, but many of the Republican governors were taking the position that this was nothing to worry about. And as I said earlier, even though that President Trump called it the coronavirus or COVID-19. He switched later in the game in March, calling it the Chinese virus, and it was done intentionally. Next one. So, if we do a fact checker on how many false statements, not only this, he hasn't said 10,000 false or misleading claims, but he said every day, if you want comedy relief, or if you're for any of you, just listen to the press conferences that President Trump says on a daily basis, and it's usually just chock full of lies. In fact, it was originally his VP Pence was doing these, but Pence was a little bit more reasonable. And Pence is an interesting guy. He was selected to be the head of I guess you would say, the COVID-19 czar. He was selected to oversee the management of the implementation. This is a guy who denied the impacts of HIV, and was using for basically prayer as the method to solve it, and it ended up very late in the game. I don't know how many people died as a result of it, but not the best person you would want to deal with a pandemic. But Trump saw the opportunity that in front of a media every day, and so he kicked him off to the side and put him regulated to the back. In fact, you're seeing now, when there's solid questions on science, he's not even letting his science people answer the questions. So it's a lot of control. It's not just false and misleading information. It is hogging the mic. It's actually being the information source. And he's not a scientist. And many of his people, Navarro, who's a social scientist, an economist, has been going on the media talking about the economic impacts and the impact. But again, an incompetent person, not able to talk about these issues in a correct way. But there's a number of people within his administration that are perpetuating the lies. Next one. So, misinformation, continuing with the politicians. As I said, the daily news briefings. One of the things that we're constantly talked about is a COVID-19 vaccine. Just within, anytime soon, everybody in the world will have a vaccine. This is a complicated virus. It's actually mutating as we speak. If you've ever had a flu vaccine, it'll cover you for a certain percentage of the flu vaccine, but not all of it. You can still get the flu if they didn't guess right. Lots of people are working on it, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be able to knock it down, and it's going to take a long time. The next thing is the untreated drug therapies. That's the most interesting thing about false information there. And it's been something you may have been hearing in its shades of 1918, exactly the type of drug that was promoted in the 1918 pandemic, the hydrochlorine chloroquine was a variant of that, was promoted back in 1918 as a solution for COVID-19. And in fact, virtually daily, Trump will say, in fact, he said, Johnson's, I'll send some of that to him so he can get recovered. There is no proof that this drug therapy will work. Very minor examples of that. And when somebody promotes something such as a drug therapy without proof, you have to start to wonder, you have to follow the money. And so he's got investments in the company that does this, but more importantly, it's a minor amount. I'm not saying he's going to make millions on this drug, but there is power brokers that definitely lobbyists in the U.S. that probably have much more stronger access to the American administration to promote this drug. So one has to question why they're doing this, and it's again, follow the money. Availability of testing kits, again, another falsehood. When you do a comparison with Korea, how quickly they actually did roadside testing and actively being involved in testing, it's amazing. Not only the lack of availability, but the cost to be tested was astronomical. The equipment supply chain. Now that has become even a more serious problem because you're having Trump stopping the shipment of 3M products. We suffered that in Canada of not getting 3M masks. Unfortunately, the guy's a little stupid. The ingredients that go into that N95 mask come from British Columbia. So, I guess somebody finally told him, I said, well, you know what? Canadians could stop shipping the raw resources for 3M. And now we did get some masks, but many countries were expecting these masks, Germany and elsewhere, and they ended up being the long arm of America reached out and they stopped that shipment. So not just that, the access to ventilators. Andrea probably can talk about New York, serious problems with ventilators. The last one is lack of ethnic, race, or class disclosure. Now, I've been trying to follow in U.S. news for the last month. This is going to have a huge impact, especially on poor Black and Latinos and poor whites throughout the states. But the American news is not revealing this kind of information. We know just by demographics, if this recession hits, we're going to see the Black Americans having 30 or 35% unemployment rate. But I had to dig deeper, and the only two sources I found ethnic race information, one was from Algeria, and they are talking in terms of the Black and minority testing and cases in the UK, and we're looking at 13% Asian, 13% Black, and 6% other. Detailed information how those communities are being impacted. If you the RT news, Russian news, I was able to access information about the cost. Where then that's not being revealed very well as well. That we are looking at. Even if a person does not have medical insurance, which a lot of people in the U.S. don't have, it'll cost them $65,000 to recover. Even if they do have medical insurance, you'll still be out of pocket $24,000. So again, that information is not being shared in terms of how this disease is going to impact certain groups more than others. Next slide. Okay, miracle cures. This is, I don't know if you guys have been following this, but America has this small group of evangelical Christians that really were behind Trump, which is a bit odd considering Trump doesn't adhere to their lifestyle. But the televangelist Jim Baker, he's a discredited televangelist. He was sued by the networks on selling fake cures. This guy's really amazing. Kevin Copeland, all you had to do is touch your screen and you'll get cured. And Alex Jones, a far right radio host, was promoting the use of toothpaste. So again, people are listening to this. And this is what's sad about it. It's a large group of people who voted for Trump, and they are getting incredible amount of false information on this. This is exact group that really needs the accurate information. They don't need some kind of misinformation. Okay, next slide. Okay, so where do we find reliable sources? Well, Bill Gates 5 years ago, and he's committed to. And if you notice, Trump has threatened to cut funding, 10% of the funding from the U.S. to the World Health Organization. 5 years ago, Bill Gates did a fantastic lecture, and as an open source Linux guy, Bill Gates ain't my hero, right? But Bill Gates, he has put his money where his mouth is. He's the biggest personal contributor to WHO, but he talked 5 years ago about a pandemic. It's not a question of we're going to have a pandemic. He's saying it's a matter of when. Okay, next one. So here's his prediction, and it's 29 million he was predicting, and it's worth seeing the TEDx, and I put it in my sources. It's worth watching the video as an example of what could. Now he's actually speaking, and he's not a scientist, but he has some gravitas because he had enough wherewithal to figure this out. Next one. I don't have many more slides. I'm sorry. I'm taking a little longer than I expected. Okay, another reliable source is the CDC. That's the website. You can get accurate information from the CDC. Next slide. Okay, these are my sources. And my last slide for today is, and again, Sala, thanks for joining us today. The PDF and the open source presentation will be available, so I'll let people to send it on. So if we can move to my last slide. Okay, so one of the things you can do is keep calm and wash your hands. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn it back to the moderator.
Yeah, thank you so much, Glenn, for the your very valuable inputs. And we'll wait for a few questions. Due to the constrained time, we can take very few questions. We have 3 more